The bells rang before the sun had fully risen. Inside the stone walls, silence had already settled into routine. Prayer before light, work before food, devotion before comfort. The convent stood far from the main settlement, built in isolation for a reason. Its inhabitants had chosen a life removed from the world. No bealt, no power, no protection, only faith. But on that morning, the sea brought something the sisters were never meant to face. Longships appeared on the horizon like shadows cutting through mist. Low, fast, silent except for the rhythm of oars. The first warning came too late. By the time the bells changed from prayer to alarm, the raiders were already on shore. Viking raids on Ireland were not random acts of chaos. They were calculated strikes. Monasteries and convents were ideal targets, isolated, poorly defended, and filled with goods that could be carried away. Books, metalwork, sacred vessels, and people. The doors did not hold for long. Accounts from early Irish chronicles describe sudden violence. Not prolonged battles but overwhelming force. Those who resisted were killed quickly. Those who did not were taken. The reality of captivity was something the sisters had never been prepared for. These were not prisoners in the modern sense. They became part of a system, one that stretched across Northern Europe. A system where human beings were traded, exchanged, and used as labor. The Norse called them thralls. A thrall was property, and once taken, identity changed. Names were lost. Status was erased. A religious life offered no protection in this world. Only usefulness mattered. Those captured were forced onto ships, often bound or guarded closely. The journey itself could take days or weeks depending on the destination. Some were taken to settlements in Ireland itself. Others were transported across the sea to Scandinavia. A few were sold further, into markets that connected Viking trade routes with the wider world, including parts of Eastern Europe and the Islamic caliphates. This was not a side activity of Viking life. It was part of the economy. In Norse society, enslaved people worked in households, farms, and workshops. They prepared food, tended animals, produced textiles, and supported the daily life of their owners. Without them, many households could not function. And women, in particular, were considered highly valuable. Not because of who they had been, but because of what they could provide. Labor, skill, and the ability to bear children. This last point mattered more than many people realize. In Norse law, the status of a child followed the mother. A child born to an enslaved woman was also enslaved. This meant that captivity did not just affect one life. It created generations. Over time, this built a permanent underclass within Norse society, people who were neither fully integrated nor fully free. For some captives, survival depended on adaptation. Archaeological evidence suggests that many enslaved women were absorbed into Norse households. They learned the language, adopted customs, converted beliefs. Some eventually gained a limited form of freedom. But even then, their past did not disappear. They existed on the margins. The Irish sources that mention these raids often describe them as acts of desecration. Not just violence against people, but against sacred spaces. Monasteries and convents were centers of learning, writing, and preservation. Many of the texts we have about early medieval Europe survived because of them. When they were destroyed or looted, knowledge was lost along with lives. Yet, these same sources were written with a purpose. They were meant to shock, to warn, to present the raiders as enemies of both society and faith. And while they capture real suffering, they are not always complete. Archaeology tells a more complex story. Excavations in places like Dublin, which became a major Viking settlement, show evidence of cultural mixing. Irish and Norse artifacts appear together. Burial practices blend over time. This suggests that not all captives remained outsiders forever. Some became part of the world that had taken them. But integration did not erase the reality of how it began. It began with fear, with ships on the horizon, with doors breaking under force, and with lives being carried away. Modern discoveries continue to reshape what we know. Isotope analysis of skeletal remains has shown that many individuals buried in Scandinavian sites were not local. Their diets and early life signatures point to origins in places like Ireland and Britain. Some of these remains show signs of hard labor, repetitive strain, nutritional stress. Others show something different, care.
Propè burial. Grave gods.
This suggests that over time, some individuals moved from enslaved status to something closer to acceptance. But the line between the two was never fully stable. Freedom could be granted or taken away. The Viking world was not built on simple categories of good or evil. It was built on survival, expansion, and power. And within that system, human lives could be transformed very quickly. From devoted religious life to forced labor in a distant land. From community to isolation. From identity to anonymity. And perhaps the most unsettling part of this history is not just the violence itself, but how ordinary it became. For those carrying out the raids, this was not an exception. It was routine. A successful raid brought wealth, status, security for the coming winter, and the people taken were part of that success. Objects of value, resources, not individuals with stories, beliefs, and lives left behind. History often remembers the ships, the battles, the expansion, but behind every voyage were people whose names were never recorded. People who disappeared from one world and were forced into another. And while we cannot recover every story, the traces remain. In bones, in artifacts, in the quiet lines of texts written centuries ago. They remind us that the Viking Age was not just an era of exploration. It was also an era of human movement, much of it forced. And for those who lived within monastery walls, far from war and politics, the sea did not bring trade. It brought change, sudden, irreversible, and often without return.